Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz saxophonist Rob Scheps on the spring 2025 visit to Emporia State, Kansas City, and Midwest shows. We caught up with this veteran musician about his spring trip to the Kansas City area, the state of jazz, the Kansas City scene, and so much more. On February 28, 2025, he will be on the campus of Emporia State University for a conversation moderated by the stellar poet and jazz musician Kevin Rabas. From there, he will be in Des Moines, Iowa on March 12th, Cedar Falls, Iowa on March 13th, and back in Kansas City on March 16th, 2025. It's a great discussion about jazz, Kansas City, and beyond. Enjoy this interview. We have reconvened. The last time I think we got together was in 2021.
Was it that long ago?
Yeah.
Could be. Well, hopefully people will be interested this time.
Yeah, no, I think they were before, and I think they will be now, so it's great to catch up. You're coming to Emporia, Kansas. You'll be in the Kansas City area, so let's get into it. How's everything going these days?
Well, sure. Well, I've actually been driving quite a bit. I did a long residency in Arizona, little bit in Phoenix, and a little more in Tucson, and so that's kind of new territory for me. Great players down there and spectacular weather for January, 73 and sunny every day. Then I went to a monastery in northern New Mexico with a bunch of sisters, nuns, and it was just a place to decompress and a way station along my route. And it was pretty positive. It was great. And then I made my way across some snowy parts of Colorado, but with good weather. And now I've been inching east in Kansas every day for the last almost week now, getting myself closer to Emporia and Kansas City.
So the event that's taking place with my good friend and the wonderful Kevin Rabas is at Emporia State University.
It's going to be Friday, February 28th.
And then you have a show the 16th?
Yeah, there's all kinds of other stuff. Basically, the show in Emporia is a live interview. Kevin's going to interview me in front of an audience, and it's the last day of Black History Month, so we're going to kind of focus on some of the great African-American artists that I got to play with, like Ray Charles and Aretha Franklin and the Four Tops and the Temptations. And, and that's an area of deep interest for me. And then from there, actually, I'm teaching in Des Moines, Iowa a little bit, sneaking back into Kansas City to get a haircut, get my flute repaired, and do some clinics, and then back up to Iowa for 2 concerts, and then back to Kansas City for the March 16th date that you mentioned. So it's a little circuitous. March 16th is the Brad Gregory Sextet plus me playing a whole evening of my new original music. And then on St. Patrick's Day and the day after, we'll be recording all of that. And that's for a whole other project called Jazz and Soul Portraits. If you want, I can tell you about that.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
I've written about 18 pieces, basically small group jazz pieces. And each one of them is a dedication to an icon and an idol of mine. So, and a lot of them are folks who passed away in the last couple of years, like Carla Bley, Wayne Shorter, Astrid Gilberto, Gary Peacock is in the mix, Albert Daly, Elvin Jones, Dinah Washington, Tammy Terrell. And what's going to happen is we're going to record in Kansas City with 7 musicians and record these pieces. And I'm collaborating with a painter and visual artist in Portland, Oregon. And she's going to create corresponding portraits. And we're going to have a gallery show, who knows when or where, but you'll put on the headphones, you'll hear the piece that I dedicated to Astrid Gilberto, and then you'll walk up to the wall and you'll see, a beautiful rendering of her. So it's a new thing for me, which is kind of mixing jazz and portraiture and visual arts.
So is your base in Portland still?
My base is everywhere, man.
Okay.
But yeah, it's bi-coastal. It's Portland and New York, but in my mind, I always think that my third home is Kansas City, because that's the place that I spend the most time over the course of a year outside of the coast. And I have so many friends in Kansas City. The musicians are so amazingly good. The food is great. So I try to spend as much time there as I can, which usually ends up being about 2 trips a year.
So what does it mean to come back? I mean, you got this level of relativity with both coasts. You have a rich history here in Kansas City. with this trip and with others, when you come back here to Kansas City, what does it mean for the history that you've had with this town?
Well, one thing about the history is that Roger Wilder, who is one of, if not the finest jazz pianist in Kansas City, I'm sure everybody would agree.
Yeah.
Roger and I go back to the Eastman School of Music high school summer session in Rochester, and I was 15 and he was 17. And that's so long ago that Roger was a trombonist.
Wow.
He converted himself into being a pianist, I pretty much at the U of Miami. So my relationship musically and personally with Roger goes all the way back, and my relationship with drummer Todd Strait, who's in and out of Kansas City, goes back almost as far. And everybody that I know in Kansas City is because of or after those two gentlemen.
So talk to me a little bit about the relationship with Kevin Rabas. I know you're going to have the talk on the 28th. Talk to me about your guys' history.
Well, Kevin Rabas and I, we met, funnily enough, my last release CD was a couple of years ago called Live at the Churchill School, which is like a volume one. We're getting ready to put out Churchill 2, but that's another subject. He gave us a great review in Jam magazine, but it wasn't just a puff piece. He seemed to really understand the music, and I really appreciated what he wrote and his insights. So I got in touch with him and just said, "Hey, man, thanks for the review." And then when I was going through Emporia, I suggested that we get together and have lunch. We have a lot of stuff to talk about. Jazz is not all of it. And we developed this relationship where Kevin is the writer and I'm the storyteller, and he's been cataloging and archiving a whole bunch of jazz stories from my career and my life and experience. And one of them was published in Jam already. It was a story about me being 17 and meeting Gil Evans. But we have a lot more in the queue that we're hoping to publish. And when I saw that I was going to need to come through Emporia in late February, we had the idea that maybe he could interview me live on stage in front of an audience, and that hopefully that would be of interest to some people. Writers are coming, musicians are coming, and it's kind of a new format. I mean, I'm doing an interview here with you 3 days before that, but normally it's over the internet or over the phone, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think is rare, but it's wonderful when you can get in front of crowds and really kind of open it up and get that interaction a little bit like, being on stage. You just feel the energy in the crowd and, the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It's like true improv. I mean, it's not like it's not now, but there's a level of it that's a little bit different when you're just kind of in front of a bunch of people.
Well, we may have some bullet points, topics that we're going to hit on, but Kevin and I kind of have a really easy verbal relationship and easy conversation. So we kind of made a little list of some topics, and then he's going to lead the interview, and I'm just going to go with it. So you're right. It's like calling Stella by Starlight, but not knowing what the solos are about to sound like.
Yeah. So I remember the last time we were on together and
Mm-hmm.
spoke, it was during the pandemic. Things were sketchy and weird, and you had your album Live at Churchill. So before
I
we
was
get into
probably pretty dark at that point. I kind of remember that.
yeah, well,
Yeah, I mean, it was
yeah,
it was a difficult time for everybody in different ways, and I'm not minimizing anyone else's pain and suffering, but for professional musicians, it was even worse because we couldn't work.
and that's why I'm so happy that we're reconvening now, and I say that so much lately in interviews. I remember during that time because I consciously decided to ramp up my interviews with jazz musicians at the time, and I remember how
Uh huh.
difficult it was. And no matter how optimistic any musician was, you could feel that pain of having absolute schedules erode. Things weren't getting promoted the way they were banking on.
Well,
So
and the feeling of the carpet being ripped out from under you.
yeah,
If you're one of many of us, I mean, for me, 90% of my living is performing. I mean, I
sure.
teach and I write and I compose, but those take up a smaller bandwidth. And generally, the live shows, the gigs are the focus. And so when you didn't have that, I could still teach my private students online. That stayed the same, but almost everything else either shut down or changed. So it was a very difficult time. Robin Eubanks, who's one of the greatest trombonists alive, told me in one of my interviews during COVID, he said, "This is the longest I've gone without a gig in 33 years."
Wow. Well, and that's
So,
why it's so good to talk to you now in the afterglow. That's kind of what I was getting at, was that now I get to talk to all these musicians that are releasing material, going out and doing live things. So, I mean, it has
yeah.
to. Has any of that worn away, that relief of being back out in the world and doing things like you used to?
Well, it's decimated, because of a certain creep who denied the very existence of this lethal disease. That the music business has been decimated, and it's not the same as it was. There might still be certain venues or clubs or concert halls or orchestras, but it's harder than it was before COVID. I'll say that with impunity.
Well, the one thing I think about that time in 1948, the UN envoy with, I believe it was either Louis Armstrong or Dizzy Gillespie, and they both did it in different incarnations, where they would go into war-torn areas of Africa and things would stop, fighting would stop for a day. I feel like that's kind of the general thing in this weird 2025 we're living in, where you musicians
Yeah.
are acting as these beacons of light, putting out things and making us feel good about being on this planet.
Well, that's really nice, Joe. I mean, I don't feel that my personality is calibrated to really make a lot of people happy when we perform. I'm just trying to play the best music that I can. However, the two people that you just mentioned, Louis Armstrong and Dizzy Gillespie, if you think about them, they were so much more than great trumpeters and great jazz musicians. They had magnanimous personalities that made people feel good and drew people in. Lewis was such a great showman, great singer, and Dizzy was so funny. I mean, Lewis was funny, I think, at times, but Dizzy was hysterical.
Yeah.
So, at whatever point in jazz history, they were ideal ambassadors to wherever they were going to go. I don't care if it's Oklahoma or Africa. And Dizzy, I think, took an all-star big band overseas, and I'm sure that made a lot of impacts. That's kind of like a side street that I'm not really ready to go down, but I do want to say for the record that Lewis and Disney would have been the ideal ambassadors at any point.
So live at Churchill, there's going to be a second part to that. What's kind of the breakdown of that? And when's that supposed to come out?
Well, I'm not sure about the date when it's going to drop, but what I can tell you is it's been mixed and mastered, so it's done.
Yeah.
It's really just more waiting for some technical things, sleeve covers, liner notes, things like that. Um, but yeah, we recorded live at the Churchill School Labor Day of 2020 when nobody could work or do anything. And I had my musicians drive out mostly from Portland, which was 300 miles away, and one musician from Eastern Oregon. And my idea was live on stage with masks, distanced, but no pets, no spouses, no kids, nothing to distract us. And we made two records in 2 days, plus a day of rehearsal. So Live at the Churchill School was volume one from those sessions, and Churchill 2 is obviously going to be volume two. So it's more material that was original, but that was written by that time. The music that I'm doing for the Jazz Portraits concert and recording is newer music. I've been on a roll. I started writing a ton of music about 6 months before COVID hit, and there were some things in my personal life that were making me upset. And I feel like it was almost like there was an earthquake rumbling that COVID was on its way, because during COVID, I taught a little, I performed very little, like once a month, which was more than some other people. But long story short, I've been writing the last 4 or 5 years more than I've ever written in my life. And I'm really fussy about it. And almost none of it ends up in the trash can. Most of it is good and usable. So that's why we have all these pieces. But, I had written pieces for Wayne Shorter and Astrid Gilberto and Albert Daly just sort of on my own. But then the idea started to coalesce like a brewing storm. I'm piling up and accruing so many of these, it could be a whole art gallery show in a museum or a gallery. And so I usually have creative ideas that I try to bring to fruition live or in the studio, but this was kind of an extension of anything I had ever done before.
Since we're kind of here in the Kansas City area, I know you're going to be in Emporia, but you'll be in KC on the 16th. You've seen this town grow over the years.
Uh
How
huh.
encouraged are you here in 2025 with what's going on jazz-wise in this town?
Well, Kansas City's a tremendous jazz town. When you just said, what are the changes? The first thing I thought was how much harder it is to park near Corvino. That
Yeah.
drives me crazy. And that's one of my favorite places to play and hear music in Kansas City. Um, Kansas City, in the 20 plus years I've been coming, is always kind of a healthy mix of jazz clubs and restaurants and bars and places like Westport Coffee House that are really more like little concert halls. Um, a lot of the venues have survived through COVID, but there are always new young players coming out of UMKC and out of KU, maybe K State, but I haven't seen them as much. And the established players like Roger Wilder and Gerald Spates and Brad Gregory and Dave Shale, remain in town. I feel. I mean, I don't live there full time, but I feel like it's an affordable, lovely, friendly, artistic place to live. So I feel that Kansas City is gaining musicians, not losing them. That's
You're
that's one
right.
part of it. And
Yeah.
and the bullpen is kind of deep. When you're in Kansas City, well, I had a gig at the Blue Room once, and it came in a little bit last minute for a Saturday night, and that's difficult because piano, bass, drums, those cats are always working. And I remember this, Joe, when COVID started to recede, Kansas City started having live gigs again before a lot of the other places I go.
Yeah.
And that's neither here nor there, but that's what happened. I just lost the thread. I'm sorry. Oh yeah. Well, so for this particular gig at the Blue Room, I called Roger and I called kind of my regular band and cohorts, and when they couldn't make it, you go down your sub list. Um, it was a particularly busy Saturday night, and I got a great band, but it took me 60 phone calls to get them. I ended up with an older African American bass player who sounded great on both basses. I had never worked with him, James Ward. He did a wonderful job. And then I had a second year college student on drums, Jade Harvey, who turned out to be great. And I had a pianist who was 17 and in high school. He was a junior. I want to encourage people of that age, but I don't normally want to perform with them unless they're exceptional, like Tony Williams or Steve Grossman, who were both with Miles Davis when they were 17. So this young gentleman, Ari Staggs, is now at UNC in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. But Roger had taught him, and Roger recommended him, and he said, listen, man, this guy's good enough to play piano or bass on your gig, with my expectations and demands. And Ari played piano, and he was still in high school, and he killed it. I've still never heard him play the bass. But this is a specific testament to the depth of the scene in Kansas City and the depth of the bullpen. When you can't get someone to play, how many other people are there on that instrument who are excellent? And the answer is, in Kansas City, the bullpen is a lot deeper than a city that size has cause to be. So it's a place that people move, it's a place that people go to college for jazz, but it's a fertile scene, and it's a place that I keep coming back to. Does that sum that up?
Yeah, it totally does. And that's the thing that I was surprised about during the pandemic time. I just was really fearful of like the Green Lady and other places just wouldn't have enough grip to hold on. But of all the cities and all the musicians I interviewed, Kansas
Yeah.
City was one of the few places that literally survived that whole time.
I
Things
can't
really
think
didn't
I
close.
can't think of a single jazz venue in Kansas City that bit the dust during
Yeah,
COVID.
yeah, I can't either. I
They're
can't
they're
either.
they're kind of all here. Well, I know that your series is you interview a variety of us jazz musicians, but most or all of them have a Kansas City connection. Is that right?
Well, I tend to go all over the globe. Yeah, I try to hone in on the Kansas City vibe, but there's a lot of people from all over the place, from both coasts and around the world, and places just
Yeah.
closed everywhere. I mean, places in LA you wouldn't think would have closed up, or New York, and um, I mean, even from your part up there in Portland, I've talked to people that are up there, and I'll tell them what's going on in Kansas City, and they're like, "Oh my God, I had no idea." And a lot of people that have moved here, like a couple people from Portland, David Watson came down here, Stan Bach came here recently, and I interviewed both of them, and they're just like, I came here and found out what's going on a casual visit, and was blown away and stayed.
Truth is, there's a part of me that doesn't want everyone to know about it because they'll just converge on it like locusts.
Yeah,
David Valdez is another guy from Portland who moved to Kansas City and lived there for a couple of years.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, and Todd Strait has
yep,
always kind of bounced back and forth between Kansas City and Portland. I mean, between gigs and kids and family, he's got reasons to be in both places.
yeah.
So but I wouldn't mind talking about some of the other places that I'm playing coming up, and also if could I put in a plug right here for the details of the gig on March 16th?
Yeah, you right now you take the reins. You go for it. You tell me where you want to go and we'll go.
I appreciate that, man. Back and forth. Well, on Sunday, March 16th, I'm going to be thrilled to be a guest again. I've done this a number of times, about once, twice a year, with Brad Gregory's excellent sextet, which, if people don't know, plays a regular, I think it's the third Sunday of the month at Westport Coffee House. And so when I play, I'm playing soprano sax and flute in lieu of a trumpeter. So it'll be me on those instruments, David Shale on alto sax and some others, Brad Gregory on tenor sax and some other woodwinds, and then Roger Wilder on piano, young bassist named Sebastian Arias, who's quite good, and the husband of the greatest pie baker in America, Jim Lauer on drums. And I'll put in that plug for Ashley's Bake Shop in the basement of Pride's in Westport.
Yeah.
I travel all over the country, as you know, Joe. I've never had better pies. And in fact, I've got an order in for this coming weekend.
Nice.
So we will play at Westport Coffee House on Sunday, March 16th, the day before St. Patrick's Day. We play two sets. We start at 6 p.m., go till about 8:30 p.m. It's lovely that it's an all ages venue. So that's good to know if you're in high school or college and you don't get to get out and hear a lot of jazz. And again, we'll be playing all new original music of mine. I'm honored to have these guys play it. And then when we record the next day, we'll have the same sextet plus the excellent trumpet player Nate Nall, who is certainly garnering more and more reputation. And he's incredible. He's one of the finest trumpet players in town. So basically, that's what's happening for the Westport gig, and we want to encourage everybody to come out. They tend to tape it, but they don't live stream it, unfortunately.
And then you're going to also have, as you had mentioned, there are some other gigs that were coming up. You'll be in Sioux Falls on the 21st, Des Moines on March 12th. So Cedar Falls on the 13th. So you're going to be out and about in the area. So I will make sure in the show notes to put a link to your website so that
Sure.
everybody can have the exact specifics of everything.
Well, I'll be just more specific very briefly. What you spoke about, I'll be performing at Noche in Des Moines with the Des Moines Big Band on Wednesday, March 12th. Then I'm performing with a faculty ensemble the next night at UNI in Cedar Falls, Iowa, March 13th. Then the sextet on March 16th in Kansas City, and then Friday, March 21st at Trio Jazz Club in Sioux Falls. And when that's all over, that's kind of the end of that Midwest trip. And then I'll be in Oregon and Washington for all of April, playing shows in both of those places. And then on my way back, I'll be working in the Flint Hills of Kansas, which I love, followed by Tucson, Arizona again.
Excellent. Is there
Thank
anything
you.
else you want to add? I think that kind of covers the tour here and what's going on, and I'll make sure to put all of this in the show notes.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything else general that you want to talk about, I've got a couple of minutes. I mean, it could be about touring and travel. It could be about the musicians you play with in different cities. Anything that you'd like to ask or talk about.
I think at this point we've covered really good ground. We really got in and dug our heels into Kansas City, your relationship with Kevin, the players that you're going to be playing with. So we've kind of built the abstract and the structures. We'll let everybody else fill it in by coming to see you and being a part of these events. So I think we've hit it. We've done good. It's taken 4 years for us to get back together. So hopefully we rendezvous in the future. But have a great spring tour, man.
Thank you. And I have a final thought, which is, I mean, everybody knows about Jay McShann and Claude Fiddler Williams being from Kansas City, and the Benny Moten band coalescing into the Count Basie band. But there are other unbelievable people from Kansas City: Bob Brookmeyer and Bobby Watson and Chris Connor, the singer. So the way I feel is like Kansas City already has a history of roughly 100 plus years of excellent jazz. And we are just sort of swimming in the swimming pool that is the continuum of that.
Absolutely.
I'm glad to be swimming in it.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. So we will keep swimming through there. Have a wonderful time on the 28th. Send Kevin my best. He's one of my dearest friends on the planet. And
Will do.
And again, have a wonderful tour, and we'll catch up down the line, man.
That sounds great, Joe. Lovely talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening and tuning into another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players and minds in Emporia, Kansas, Des Moines, Iowa, Kansas City, Missouri, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Rob for swinging on back by the show. If you want to hear more Neon Jazz interviews, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to us at YouTube, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to theneonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.